In this video, I'm going to give you 5 key things that you need to do before you get into any sort of heavy strength training and any sort of heavy compound movements especially.
You can say hello, but I don't need you to like.
What's up, guys? Welcome to this JR Strength and Fitness, your friendly YouTube channel with all of your exercise science needs, your reaction video wants, and of course some exercise tutorials, because why the hell not? So again, please like and subscribe and tell your friends about me. Keep rolling, keep growing, keep doing all the things that we're doing right now. Like I said, we're doing 5 key things that you need to do before you get into heavy strength training. So most people, when they get into the field of lifting or fitness or strength trainer or whatever, especially the guys, I'm pointing out the guys first off, but there's such a huge focus of trying to do a huge amount of weight as fast as possible. So for example, you go into the gym, your buddies have been training for a while and you're like the new kid, right? You're brand new to this whole entire thing. All of a sudden, you think you have to lift the same thing that your buddy's lifting. Or you go to the gym one day and notice a bunch of these guys or gals lifting all these heavy weights, and you're just like, oh man, like I gotta like match up to them, otherwise I'm going to be like singled out as that wimp over there. No, put that crap away. You don't need that. No one needs that. You have to build up to that just like everyone else has, but these 5 things will get you there a lot quicker and a lot more safer too. Again, full disclaimer, while I am an exercise professional, please know that this is just for educational entertainment purposes only, and please do not do anything that I say or do just because I'd say them. Please see a physician and a person that you are willing to sign a check to. The first thing, obviously, is form. Form is obviously important, especially when you involve compound movements like a deadlift, squat, because you're heavily loading the spine. You're heavily loading a bunch of these joints. If you're not utilizing proper form, you're going to apply excess stress at a given joint. You are going to potentially damage whatever sort of structure you currently have. And for the most part, it's going to set you back even longer because you are rushed into it. So proper form is going to be important, especially when they have complex movements such as a snatch or clean and jerks. While I don't necessarily want to pick on CrossFit right now, and even though I am a CrossFit coach, there are some times where I will tell people like, hey, you're not ready to do a full snatch yet. Because why would I have someone do a full snatch when they don't know how to overhead squat yet? And why would I have someone do an overhead squat when they don't know how to squat yet? So it's this kind of line of thinking that you have to think about. You can't just do a certain exercise just because everyone else is doing it, or just because you feel like you're going to get left out and you feel like you can just learn as you go. No, that's not how it works. You need to respect the barbell. If you don't respect the barbell will definitely not respect you. So learning proper form, knowing when you're not in the correct position, knowing when you are properly in the correct position, and knowing when to deviate when needed. So what I mean by that is every single time I might squat slightly different. So for example, my feet might be angled out a day. I might be a little bit more upright. It all depends on how other structures on my body feel. That comes over practice and time. It's not like I'm going to set my feet in the same position every single time I squat. They are going to be modified depending on mobility, stability, musculature I'm like focusing in on. Because if I have a wider stance, I'm going to have a little bit more emphasis on a certain muscle group than if they were inside. So as far as that goes, that's something you can learn over time. But the main thing is to know when your deviation is detrimental to your overall well-being. The second thing, and this is what I do for my clients, like specifically when we start, is core strength and stability. So those two kind of have a very umbrella term, but for the most part, people view the core as their abs. So when I say core strength and stability, they assume that I have to do a lot of crunches, a lot of sit-ups, and all the other stuff. We actually don't do any of that. I don't have people do almost any form of crunches or sit-ups because that's not how I want to train the spine. I'm trying to strain the spine more than needed to. So adding an excessive amount of spinal flexion is not where I'm trying to get at. Most of my athletes and most of the clientele I have, they haven't been taught how to properly utilize their core. And I'm talking about the local stabilizers. I'm talking about the TVA, even the diaphragm, how to breathe correctly. So most people breathe, with their chest. They like expand the chest up this way instead of breathing down into their belly. So utilizing the diaphragm as a stabilizer, because it is a local stabilizer, they need to learn that. They need to learn how to locally stabilize their spine, because a lot of these deep core muscles you're not going to get just from doing a bunch of crunches or sit-ups. These are things like dead bugs, planks, properly though, but you need to learn how to utilize these muscles, and then of course get them stronger over time. Before I get into any sort of heavy training, my clients typically go through like a couple weeks, depending on where they are status wise, or depending on where we're trying to get to. So for example, one of my athletes, when he initially started training with me, so we went through about 6 weeks, maybe a little longer, of dialing down the core, because especially the sport that we were focusing on, especially where he was frame wise and structure wise, I was looking at him, I'm like, dude, I'm afraid to put weight on you. Like, your spine might snap in half. So what we did is I made his spine as rigid as possible. I made his core just locked in to the point where we don't have to worry too much about that, because I know that it's rigid. I made it rigid. So obviously a progressive overload as far as these core exercises go, stabilization, balance, and those things do play a role. And core stabilization doesn't necessarily have to just be the midsection. It involves the pelvic area, the hips, the glutes. The gluteus medius is an underappreciated stabilizer. It's a global stabilizer. So think about it this way. If I'm walking down the street and I'm walking down and my gluteus medius all of a sudden, it doesn't like turn off or anything. Let's just say it just dies. Just imagine your gluteus medius dies. That's not going to happen, but just assume it. But one thing that will do is your hip will literally lopside and you would tip over, essentially, because that gluteus medius is there to help stabilize your pelvis when you shift weight. So as soon as it's not properly working, you're going to have an uneven stabilization at the hip. So this will affect things as far as dynamic movement goes, obviously. Running, walking, stepping up and down, lunging, squatting, those things that involve the pelvic girdle. So we need to make sure those are good. The other area that is included in the whole core stabilization is the shoulder girdle. So the rotator cuff muscles, we do a lot of activation just to make sure those muscles are not only activated but strong. We want them to be able to handle deceleration of the arm. We want them to be able to handle stabilization overhead. And then of course that kind of pairs with the form, learning how to stabilize weight overhead, learning how to stabilize your shoulder in a optimal position. So those things kind of play along together, and this whole entire thing comes together as soon as we get to the rest of the 5. The third thing is mind-body connection. Now, this might seem like a tedious, trivial thing, but believe me when I tell you, new people have no idea what muscles they are supposed to be utilizing or engaging. So when I'm training with someone, I'm constantly, especially initially, constantly reinforcing like, okay, where are you feeling it? Do you feel it here? You're not feeling it there. We have to fix that. Okay, because some of these movements like a squat or deadlift, there's a certain area like glutes, for example, hamstrings, tension as far as where we are in our position. So on a deadlift, if I were to set up and I like crank down on the bar and I don't have any tension in my lats, that pre-pull? So I need to take slack off the bar. People don't know that inherently. So they go down, reach the bar, and then they yank it. They kind of just like jerk it off the ground. So what we need to learn is that we want that mind-body connection. Like before I pick up the bar, I want tension here and here. I want tension in my lats. I want tension in my hips and my hamstrings. I want tension before I stand up with it. In a squat, if I'm squatting down, I feel mostly quads, like I'm driving my knees forward. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but if I don't feel like I have any sort of glute activation where I'm just feeling all quads, either my feet angle is a little too narrow, either my body is shifting forward a little too much, or I just do not know how to engage the glutes yet. So emphasizing that kind of heel placement, fixing up the angles. That way we can get to a point where, like, do you feel it in your glutes now? Do you feel your butt actually helping? Yes, I do. So there are many ways you can do this. You can implement isolation exercises such as glute bridges, hip thrusts. That way you can learn how to, okay, this is what I'm supposed to feel. Okay, cool. A large portion of what I do with clients, like initially, first like few meetings, like, hey, where are you feeling this? Are you feeling it here? If you're not feeling it here, we need to get to a point where you can feel it there. And that way, over time, they learn how to do that themselves. It doesn't necessarily need to be like I'm there every single time they're training and I'm making sure, like, hey, is your butt working? Is your butt working? I don't need to like take a stick and poke them every single time. Like, hey, learn what needs to be moving and what needs to be active when you're doing some sort of exercise. The fourth thing is fixing any sort of movement dysfunctions or postural deviations. Now, this is a large scope that might need another video. And for the record, I'm not a physical therapist, nor do I want to get into that realm right now. But there are deviations that occur in movement, and that can be from excess amount of inactivity where muscles either get very weak, they get very tight, etc. A bunch of things could happen, but fundamentally we need to analyze these postural deviations and how excess amount of stress could be added if we added load. So for example, think about it this way. If I have a client who has an excess amount of hyperlordosis, which is the excess amount of arch, you know how the Instagram girls do it, they kind of just arch their back like that. Some people have an excess amount of that where they're applying excess amount of stress on the spine. If I were to take them and I'm going to load them on a heavy back squat in that position, things aren't going to go well. So what they need to learn how to neutralize their pelvis. If there are muscles that are weak, we need to make them stronger, such as the hip flexors, hamstrings, whatever. If there are some muscles that are super, super tight, like same thing, hamstrings and hip flexors, they could be either or. Then we need to stretch those out and make sure they're actually able to allow proper movement. Some muscles are so tight that you can barely move. So I've gotten to a point in my life sometimes where I've been sitting down for excess amount of time because, I'm doing computer stuff. And hip flexors get super, super tight, hamstrings get so tight that I can barely move my pelvis. And it starts to cause back problems. Clients initially, we break down, okay, are you feeling any discomfort in these movements? We analyze posture, we analyze their movement, and where there's deviation. And then I can address it. This whole entire thing has a lot more to it that I have to break down in a different video. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. Address the muscles that are weak, address the muscles that are super tight, and then we can get to proper movement. And that obviously goes in line with form. Sometimes people aren't actually able to get into proper form. They just can't do it. So if you have for example, a new coach, a new trainer, he or she is like constantly drilling on this person to get into the proper form. This person might not be able to. They might be so tight that they just cannot get into the form. So you address these things. So all those four things could technically go together. You can work on core stabilization and strength as you work on these other postural deviations, and then that tends to improve form as you learn, because things are learned. It just takes time. The fifth thing is just kind of thrown in there, but you need to learn from someone. And no, I'm not just saying that just because I'm a trainer, I want you to pay me. No, that's not it. Whether you hire someone, whether you go to the gym with a very competent person you trust, then you need to learn from someone. It's the same thing as everything else. It involves skill. It involves learning. It involves practice. But deliberate practice though. You need to actually learn how to do these correctly from someone who can provide that feedback. So the four things that I listed, learning proper form, core stabilization, postural deviations, and of course the mind-body connection, you can have someone there to help provide feedback for those four areas. So any sort of given field, it is always important to learn from someone so you can learn the ins and outs, because there might be things that you just don't pick up on or haven't thought about. So I myself had coaches. I've had coaches teach me how to do the Olympic lifts. I've had coaches teach me how to deadlift properly. I myself had to learn at some point. And now I'm obviously a coach, so I provide that same learning process for other people. Don't go out thinking you can just figure it out on your own. Like, there's nothing wrong with asking for help. Am I doing this correctly? Okay, what's the best way to engage my glutes or anything along those lines? So those things are important, and I don't want those to get forgotten. But those are 5 fundamental things that you should do before you get into heavy strength training, so that A, you can continue to do heavy strength training, and B, you don't mess up your body at a young age, because that would suck. And believe me, you do not want to be 20 something with banged up knees or a back because you were deadlifting or squatting improperly. It'll be better off just asking someone for help, working on these little things. And it's not like it takes months to develop these things. This can occur very quick, especially if someone actually is deliberate with it. You do the proper core exercise you're supposed to do, you do the proper stretches like I give you, and then you learn. You deliberately spend time practicing these movements, you'll be fine. But for the most part, people tend to overlook these and they jump straight into heavy training, and then they have some sort of back problem, they have some sort of knee problem, and they wonder why. So these are 5 things you must do, and if you don't, well, good luck to you.